One of the most interesting handhelds of all time has to be the Nintendo DS. It was originally supposed to just complement the Game Boy line, but it ended up overtaking the Game Boy line and becoming this huge phenomenon. And honestly, when it first was unveiled and released, I didn't really care about it, which is kind of strange. But I just thought it seemed a bit gimmicky. I didn't really understand the two screens, the touch screen, and all that stuff, so I wasn't super interested in it. It wasn't until my buddy picked one up and I went over to his house to check it out, and we checked out the Metroid Prime Hunters demo, and I was absolutely blown away by how cool this system was, utilizing the touchscreen to control your aim, the way that the system used two screens as one screen. It was just mind-blowing. I ended up having to drive like 40 minutes out of the way to pick one up, and I absolutely loved it. So it's been a phenomenal system, and it has such a huge library of games. There's like over 2,000 games on the Nintendo DS, so more than likely there's going to be some hidden gems on the system. So on today's video, that's what I want to talk about. I have played a ton of Nintendo DS games, and there's a lot of games that nobody ever really seems to talk about that I definitely think people should. There's going to be some games that you might have heard of on this list. There's going to be some games that you probably have never heard of. I try to do an interesting variety of games to give you guys. So sit back, relax, make sure you subscribe to the channel, and let's talk about some Nintendo DS hidden gems.
Hey, RGT 85. Hey, Sean.
Oh my God, it's Stevie Richards!
The first game I want to talk about is a game that's really for Grand Theft Auto fans. Now, of course, there was Grand Theft Auto Chinatown Wars on the Nintendo DS, which was an absolutely phenomenal game. But it wasn't that sort of Grand Theft Auto that we had seen since Grand Theft Auto 3. It was the original top-down style. And for some reason, that turned some people off who are big on graphics. Well, if you're big on graphics, Cop the Recruit has arguably some of the best graphics on the Nintendo DS. It's essentially a Grand Theft Auto style game, except you play as a rookie detective who's named Dan Miles, who's trying to figure out what happened to your mentor. The gameplay is more along the lines of Driver than Grand Theft Auto, but obviously there are some Grand Theft Auto influences within the game. The 3D graphics in the game are just literally absolutely insane. It's a replica of New York City, and it's amazing how they managed to get this sort of style of game into the Nintendo DS. It's a somewhat open world. It's definitely smaller than a lot of other open world games, but just the fact that it's a 3D open world on the Nintendo DS is absolutely amazing. The gameplay is a bit spotty, the shooting mechanics aren't all that great, maybe the story isn't all that great either. It's definitely not one of the best games on the system, but it's definitely a cheap game, and definitely a game that you should check out if you're a fan of games like Grand Theft Auto or Driver, because it really packs a decent punch. The next game is definitely one of the more popular games on this list, but it's definitely a game that I need to talk about because I thought it was absolutely fantastic, and that is Hotel Dusk Room 215. You play as a former New York City detective who's now a door-to-door salesman named Kyle Hyde, who's basically looking for his old friend at this old hotel. And you get to this hotel and you're given the room 215, and supposedly the room 215 grants wishes and things like that. You're not really sure what's going on when you enter this hotel, but you start to unravel a big mystery within this hotel, and it's really a unique game on the Nintendo DS. You hold your Nintendo DS like a book from side to side, and it's a sort of first-person game where you're just exploring different areas and you're doing a lot of talking, but the story is very well written. There's lots of interesting twists and turns. All of the characters are pretty well fleshed out as well. There's a lot of different puzzles to solve in the game, and it's not the hardest game in terms of a point-and-click style adventure game, but it's definitely a very satisfying game. It's a really good story, and it really uses an interesting art style that has sort of a comic book feel to it. I really enjoyed this game. I think it's sort of an under-the-radar game as well. People have heard about it, but maybe people haven't played it, so Hotel Dusk Room 215, definitely a game for point-and-click adventure fans. The next game I want to talk about is a game that I picked up very early in my Nintendo DS library. It got a lot of good reviews, but I don't think it sold very well, and that's a game called Meteos. Now, Meteos is a puzzle game, and you basically are matching three like pieces either vertically or horizontally. Now, what's interesting about this is when you match these three pieces, the pieces then fly up into the air, and they affect the pieces around them. So there's like a whole gravity system. It takes place in outer space in the story mode, and you quickly learn that each level has its own different sort of gravity. It's a really interesting mechanic, but it really leads to some fast and frantic gameplay. I really enjoy Meteos. I think it's a game that everyone can really get into because of the visual style is very, very clean, and the audio, the soundtrack in the game is absolutely phenomenal. There's so many different styles of music that the game incorporates, and the gameplay is really fun, honestly. It's sort of a tried and true system, but the addition of the gravity within the levels really makes it unique. There's a lot to do in this game as well, a bunch of different gameplay modes. Of course, unfortunately, you can't play online anymore, but if you're a puzzle fan, Meteos definitely needs to be in your Nintendo DS collection because it's a game that doesn't disappoint. There was surprisingly a decent amount of horror games on the Nintendo DS, and I think everyone knows about the main ones, games like Dementium, Resident Evil Deadly Silence. If you don't know about Dementium though, maybe I'll cover it in a future Hidden Gems for the Nintendo DS, but this game was definitely under the radar. This next game, not a lot of people talked about it. It got sort of mediocre reviews, but I ended up picking it up and I really liked it, and it's a game called Touch the Dead. Yes, Touch the Dead. It's probably not the best name, but you saw a lot of sort of puns like that on the Nintendo DS. Touch the Dead has you playing as a prisoner named Rob Steiner. You're basically in your cell, and all of a sudden your cell door opens, and you're like, why did the door open? You go outside of your cell, and look, zombies and the undead are ready to kill you. This game is basically an on-rails shooter, and it's very fast and frantic. To shoot, you obviously just touch the dead. You tap the touch screen. Now, what's interesting is the way you reload your gun is you drag a clip over to your actual clip that's on the screen, and it's kind of cumbersome, but I feel like it adds to the gameplay a bit. It really adds a level of tension to the game. You explore different areas within the prison, and then of course surrounding the prison, and it's a really decent game. It sort of reminds me of 90s arcade shooters. Basically, you're just on rails, you know, blasting through hordes of enemies and things like that. There's boss battles, there's different weapon upgrades. It's a solid game. It's definitely not the prettiest game, it's definitely not the most fun, and the reloading mechanic can be a bit cumbersome and a bit frustrating at times, but it's a game that I really enjoyed. I enjoyed it when it originally released, and I still enjoy it today. So Touch the Dead, definitely a game that if you're a fan of old school shooting games, if you're a fan of old school horror games, you might get some fun out of it. One genre that was definitely sort of lacking on the Nintendo DS was the shoot 'em up genre. You would think it would make sense that there would be a lot of shoot 'em up games on there, but there really wasn't. But the games that were on there were really good. And a game that I definitely want to talk about is Nano Straigh. I absolutely fell in love with Nano Straigh. It was one of my most addictive Nintendo DS games. It is a standard vertical shoot 'em up. It's a combo-based scoring system. They're basically just trying to get a high score and blast through waves of enemies. It's nothing different. It's nothing really super unique, but what's here is very solid. The soundtrack is very good, and the graphics for the Nintendo DS are pretty impressive. Very smooth, very colorful, and a very fun game. Now, when this game originally released, it had online leaderboards, and the first level was Mitsurin Jungle, and myself and my buddy would always try to climb the leaderboards. I believe my best ranking in this game was like top 10, and I believe he was number 1 in North America for quite a while until hackers overtook the leaderboard system. But if you're a fan of shmups, Nano Straigh and its sequel, Nano Straigh 2, are definitely very solid shoot 'em up games, very colorful, very fun, very responsive, and super good games. An NES game that often pops up on Hidden Gems list is The Legend of Kage. Well, did you know that The Legend of Kage had a sequel, The Legend of Kage 2, on the Nintendo DS? Of course you didn't, because nobody really bought this game, but for some reason I ended up with it. The Legend of Kage 2 is of course a sequel to the original NES game where you either play as Kage or Chihiro, both of which have unique weapons, and you're basically just trying to save a princess from an evil demon. It's pretty standard ninja affair. You have the high jumps that are known for the original game with the treetop stuff, but it's not really all that prevalent as it was in the original game. The game has pretty decent graphics, the soundtrack is alright as well, and the controls can be a bit stiff until you get used to them, but I think it's a pretty fun ninja game. It's definitely an under the radar game, a game that nobody really ever talks about. Definitely not a super great game, but a solid game, a fun game, and if you like the original Legend of Kage, you'll probably enjoy this game too. If you're into ninja stuff, Ninja Gaiden, definitely worth checking out. Next game is arguably one of the best games on the Nintendo DS, but since it came out sort of towards the end of the Nintendo DS's life cycle, it didn't really sell all that great, and that is Aliens Infestation. Now, you would think a licensed game, it's probably not going to be all that great, but this was developed by WayForward, who has a great pedigree when it comes to developing games. It's basically a 2D game where you control 4 different colonial marines within the Alien universe. There's lots of areas from the movies within the game as well. The visuals are absolutely amazing. It's so so smooth and it just looks so great. It's a Metroidvania style game as well, so there's a lot of exploration and it's going to take you quite a while to get through this game. The enemies are all really cool, and based on the Alien universe, everything is animated just beautifully. It's just top to bottom a fantastic game. The soundtrack is really spooky and puts you in the mood. It's a shame that this game didn't get as much coverage and as much press and as much sales as it probably should have, but with videos like this, I'm able to inform you guys. I actually picked this game up at a con last year for like 10 bucks, which is sort of under the radar because it's like a $30 to $40 game, but I would have gladly paid $30 to $40 for this game. It's an absolute must-own on the Nintendo DS and an absolute must-experience game on the Nintendo DS. Whenever I talk about emulation, I always tell this same story, but I'm going to tell it again because it's based on this game. 9 hours, 9 persons, 9 doors was a game that I was sort of interested in. I thought it looked really cool, but I knew nothing about it. So I emulated the game, I downloaded a ROM to check it out to see if it was a game that I liked, and I absolutely loved what this game offered, and I ended up picking it up, and I probably would have never bought it if I never originally emulated it. You basically play as a character along with 8 other characters who are trapped on a cruise ship. You're basically kidnapped and put on this cruise ship. You have to find the door marked with a 9 within 9 hours, or else the ship sinks, it blows up, and you are toast. It's sort of like a Saw game in terms of storytelling, and I really like that. It's definitely very mature with lots of mature themes. There's 2 different gameplay modes that the game has. There's the novel mode and then the escape mode. The novel mode is basically where you're reading stuff, and there's a lot of reading within this game. It's more of an interactive novel because the gameplay elements are just sort of sprinkled in, but I think it works in this game because it tells a fantastic story. And in the escape areas, basically you're put into a first-person perspective where you can search for different areas of a room, sort of like in Myst and a point-and-click adventure, and basically you're trying to solve a puzzle to either escape the room or complete a task within that room. There's tons of different branching story paths, there's tons of different endings within the game as well. It's just an absolutely fantastic game. 9 hours, 9 persons, 9 doors, definitely a game worth checking out on the DS. And the final game I want to talk about is unfortunately a very expensive game nowadays, which really surprised me, but I guess I sort of understand it because nobody cared about this game when it came out. All of the reviews gave it mediocre scores, but once gamers actually got a hold of it, they realized that this was actually a really good game, and that is Fighting Fantasy Warlock, a Firetop Mountain for the Nintendo DS. It's basically based on a pen and paper adventure series, and it's given a first-person perspective that plays a lot like original Elder Scrolls games. You're basically put into this huge area, and then you're just exploring this area and trying to kill different enemies, find different shops within this area, get to the top of Firetop Mountain, and take out the main boss. It's an absolutely awesome adventure, very challenging. Sometimes you'll enter areas where you can get a quick death, so I recommend saving often, but the 3D graphics in the game are actually pretty surprising. Your enemies are sort of flat 2D character models, sort of like in Hexen on 64, but I think it works for this game. The game is really fun. There's a bunch of different classes and spells that you can use as well. It's a really fun game, a really good game, and a game that I'm surprised that not more people know about. Fighting Fantasy, the Warlock of Firetop Mountain, an absolutely excellent game, and a game that I absolutely love on the Nintendo DS. Alright, and those are just a handful of Nintendo DS hidden gems. I had a bunch of other games on this list, but I didn't want to do like a 30-minute video because I don't think anyone wants to hear me talk for 30 minutes. But I will eventually do a follow-up to this video like I will with all of my hidden gems videos, because there's always games out there that people don't know about. There's always awesome games, and there's always fun games that people just don't talk about, that need to be talked about. So let me know in the comment section down below if you're familiar with any of these games, or what games you would like me to talk about in the future on a future Hidden Gems episode. And as always, thank you for watching this video. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, and as always, I'll catch you guys on the next one. Later.